Just share about myself. My name's Stacy and I'm from Ventura County Office of Education. I also am the Region 8 Arts Lead. And I wear a few hats at Ventura County Office of Ed. I've been working on as the VAPA coordinator for the last 4 years for our county, and then I also do professional development in reading, ELD, mathematics, data teams. So I kind of do a lot of different things, and my favorite thing is to go back in the classroom and do demo lessons. So I'm usually in the classroom at least once a week doing demos, and that's where I am on Friday, so I'm very excited to get back in there. What we're going to talk about today is I'm going to figure out where everybody's kind of background is. So I've talked to several different people. We have some administrators in here, we have some teachers, we have some kind of consultants in here. So we're going to figure out what your background is with data teams, and more specifically, we're going to look at PLCs, so professional learning communities, and just kind of look at, you know, these different descriptors. So you might be a novice, where you're new to PLCs, maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it, or you'd like to know some more information about it, or you might be at an apprentice level where you've tried it out at your school sites or within your districts, or if you think you're at the master level where it could be that your site or your district is kind of a model program, and we'd love to hear some strategies too. I'm going to be sharing what we use as our kind of model programs in our county office, but just kind of think about where you're at, and then I'm going to have a chance for you to kind of share with your partner. So go ahead and turn to the partner that you're kind of sitting close to. Sometimes it might be working in a triad, depending on how you're sitting, but just introduce yourself, let them know. You don't have to say what level you are. You can just use one of these sentence language frames to kind of start off your conversation about PLCs with your partner. I do what it's called a 10-2. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's where I'll talk for maybe 5 minutes and then you have time to process with your partner. It's called a 10-2 or a 5-1. So I'm going to be sharing just a lot of, really today's about resources for PLC. Also, I've kind of scaffolded it so it's at different levels. So we have 3 things that we're going to explore within the next hour. One is what are the importances of PLCs and how do they inform our practice and really the culture of our school sites or the districts that we're working with? How do we engage our participants in being more reflective within the PLC? That's really a lot of the resources that we have in here. And then what are the best practices for it? And that's going to be some sharing out within here, and then also be sharing some strategies that we have. The resources that I'm using today basically come from DeFore, so just kind of a quick thumbs up if you've read DeFore, you know DeFore. The other resource I use, which actually she was the first kind of guru behind PLCs, and she calls them professional learning teams. So it's Ann Jolly. She came out of Texas. She was out at our county office about a year ago doing a PLC workshop with us for the year. So we've been working with DeFore every year for the last 5 years, and then we have Ann Jolly come out too. So I put in here a lot of resources where if you're familiar with DeFore, some of these are going to be a little bit different when looking at Ann Jolly's because she calls them professional learning teams. So because she feels that instead of a community, it really has to turn into a team environment, and how do you have them foster teamwork? How do you have your staffs, or your grade levels, your disciplines work together as a team and figure out how they're going to collaborate? So we're going to be talking about that today. These are just different kind of, I call them engagement activities that we're going to do, and kind of an overview of today. So we started off with just a kind of getting to know activity where you convene the community. I'm going to jump into DeFore where we have an article. You're going to do a glean the article based on what is a PLC, just at the very basic level if you're not familiar with what a PLC is. Then we're going to move into cultural shifts within PLCs. So what is it that makes a PLC either a successful PLC? How can you take it to the next level when working with teams? We'll go through strategies that work for professional learning communities. And also we're going to end with kind of like a scavenger hunt activity where you're going to be looking through about 20 different pages of resources. And these were resources that we've either used at our school sites through a lot of our data teams trainings, or it could be resources to enhance your PLCs right now. So I pulled them out of Ann Jolly or DeFore. And then we'll end, which is kind of a self-reflection and thinking about your professional learning community and how you can move to the next step. So let's just kind of go back to where we were before. So if you're a novice, just kind of a thumbs up right here so I can see. Anybody novice? Okay, we have a few people who are novice. Have an apprentice. Who in here is apprentice level? Okay, and then masters.
Maybe in between.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of in between. Okay, good. So we have all different levels in here, and when we get to the masters, we're going to have hopefully some share time. So if you're using protocols or if you're using specific ways that you have teams meet together, we'll have a chance for you to share about that. Here are the engagement strategies, and we're going to be flexible with these because we're in this nice room. So we're not going to do a lines of communication, but if you wanted to take this back and do this presentation, you'll all have access. I can email you the PowerPoint and all the resources you have. So maybe a lines of communication is a way that you can do your team building. We're also going to do a think, write, pair, share, glean the golden line from an article. So you're just taking the major point of the article. And then my background is I do a lot of professional development within Project GLAD. So it's guided language acquisition design. I'm a key trainer for GLAD. So I'm going to do a quick pictorial of what a professional learning team cycle looks like. And then we have a chance for you to read, different teams are going to be reading different case studies that come right out of the DeFore book. And then we're going to end with like a block party, a give one, get one strategy. So that's what we're going to work on. Throughout the presentation, you have your purple handout, which is the PowerPoint. I just kind of pulled out the most important slides in there. And then if you need handouts, I have extras up here, and there's plenty outside because I made enough for triple the size of this room. So if you want to take more back to your site, you can do that. One of the things when you look at professional learning communities is that they feel that it's the most important and promising practice for really improving a school site. And it's having it where it's a shared leadership. It's not the principal saying something that has to happen. It's not a superintendent. It's not a grade level chair. It's not one grade level even kind of driving what's going to happen. It's really what they're going to work on as a team together at a school site. So we're going to be looking at that this afternoon. And if we were going to do the lines of communication, we were going to have you kind of stand on a piece of line, and I was going to partner you up with somebody at the opposite spectrum. So if you were a novice, I was going to wrap around the line and have you talk to somebody that is maybe at master level. So let's do this. You can just kind of turn and share with your partners, and as you're sharing, after we do about 4 questions, I'm going to have you share out what you heard your partners saying. So listen for what your partners are saying. Maybe there's something that you think is really interesting that you'd like the whole group to hear. The first question with your partners is, how much experience do you have with collaborative teamwork or learning when you're thinking about PLCs, especially at your school site or at your district level? How much experience do you have with it?
There was a grade level chair, but then kind of found out that was just something that
I think like academically because
right,
there's
we're
another
going to kind of come back together for a second. So we're looking at experience with collaborative teamwork and looking at that. There's different levels of it. So I'm just going to share a little bit about myself, then we're going to go to the next question I'm going to have you share out too. So I came from, before the county office, I was in Santa Monica, Malibu Unified School District. We did a lot of PLC trainings there. And what we did, most of our work around was lesson studies. So we have teachers think about looking at the data, which concepts, and it can be arts integrated, it can be focused on vocabulary. We look and see which specific skills do the students need. We plan a lesson together, and then we go in and take turns watching each other teach for one day. And then every time we watch somebody teach, we kind of refine the lesson, and then it gets better the next time. So that's one level. We've had a lot of work that I've seen at the county office that we were working on too was looking at data. So how many people in here use data to kind of drive your PLCs? and most likely it's probably around standardized testing. But I want you to think about today, if you can shift it so it's at an art level, what might it look like? Is it that art is going to be integrated into the lesson, or is it you're going to focus on art? And maybe we've had a lot of sites saying that they're turning into an arts integration school, so what would be your focus then if it's going to be art related? Next question. So if you haven't shared, maybe have the person that hasn't shared get a chance to share. Explain how important it is for you to work together with colleagues to improve instruction. So how important is that to you? And just kind of explain your background on that.
We're just talking about the
Who wants to share something you've heard a partner sharing about either the importance of collaboration or working with colleagues or experience? So either one that you heard a partner just sharing something. Yeah.
She was saying that she works with dance teachers, and often they are more like district-wide or school-wide, and so she brings the whole group together for a PLC that that they can collaborate on because they're not tied into a third-grade team or something.
We were just reflecting, Lorna's special ed and I'm regular classroom, and she was saying that she has nobody to collaborate because her group is so unique. But as we were thinking of it in this context, we collaborated and made it possible, but it really means for her to have to initiate because nobody's going to go to the special ed classroom and say, let's collaborate. So.
Yeah. And a lot of the protocols when we're get to it, it's at different levels. So if you're a principal in here, I think I've seen a couple principals, you might be an administrator, you might be a leadership team member at your school site. There are kind of protocols in place where you need to check about, is everybody in a team? And if they're not a team, what are you going to do for, unique individuals that either teach, certain electives, or they might be teaching certain periods of the day where they're not there for the full day. The next thing I just want you to think about is when you put it in the terms of art and you're doing something where you're either going into classrooms and observing what's happening or having teachers bring in artwork, what have you noticed that if you have the work focus around art rather than math? Have you noticed any changes that if you have teachers bring in artwork with students that are integrated within the content standards, have you noticed any differences between the two if you were to do that? Have you tried that before? Or?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Yeah. So one thing I've noticed is that when I have, we've done some professional learning communities around art, kind of like what we're doing right now at our colloquium. So teachers are bringing in lessons that are either totally arts-based or arts integrated, and I've noticed that teachers that normally aren't as easy with having other teachers come in and observe, when it's related to arts, their level of comfort kind of is reduced. So is increased. So they feel more comfortable sharing within art. So it's a place where they feel like they can take a risk. They can also learn from one another. So it's one thing to look about is that if you're working with PLCs, when you integrate arts within it, teachers typically will feel more comfortable within doing art. So I'm going to go on to, how about this one? I'm just going to end with this one question, is that there are many advantages when you think about PLCs. So you could be sharing new strategies. You could also be having best practices put in place, having it where it's really specific within the time of what you're going to focus on for your instruction. Think about if you've ever worked on a PLC, what might be a disadvantage within a PLC? It could be that structures aren't in place. It could be that some other things when looking at PLCs. What would be a disadvantage when looking with PLCs or PLCs that you've worked on before? Just kind of think about it. You can share with a partner, and I'm sure you can think of a few disadvantages. There are many, many advantages. They far outweigh the disadvantages, but what we're going to discuss today too is that if you're just having teachers get together during their after-school time or during your kind of team collaboration time and there's no protocol in place, or if they're not all aligned as a grade level, that could be a disadvantage because you might have some teams that are just getting together and they might be talking about an upcoming field trip, which is very important, but you're not going to get to the data, where you're thinking about the best practices in place. Or if you have an administrator that's not creating a time that's going to work for everyone and thinking about how much time it might take. Also, they might create an environment where subs can come in and provide enough time for prep and collaboration and planning, or having things set in place where you can watch one another for instruction. That would also not work. And then also, when you think about how teams are created for PLCs, that has to be something that's put in effect. Just like with teaming. If you're going to team with a teacher, not everybody can team with one another. You need to think about the personalities of the team. You need to also, what they found was do a lot of team building activities. So something should be done at different levels to have them learn from one another and also grow together as a team. So we're going to start with just kind of a quick quiz, and it's the first page of your white packet. And the directions for this is just kind of take the quiz, and then we're going to discuss them together. So why don't you go through their 7 questions. We'll just do about 2 minutes quietly. You can go through and put down what you think. So the resource for this came from Anne Jolly's book. It's noted at the bottom of the page too if you'd like to use it. Team to Teach. So the first question is, the most important determinant of student achievement is, who thinks they know this? C. You think C. You know, there have been a lot of studies that it is C, but actually it's B. It's teacher knowledge and expertise. So having teachers and knowing that knowledge can increase as they work together as a team. Although there was a lot of research out with C that came out like 6 years ago, but when they looked further at schools that are making significant growth, it's teacher knowledge and expertise when looking at that. So it's still the teacher, the #1 thing that can make the difference within instruction. The second one is C. So it's the differences in the quality of teaching. Number 3, this I think is interesting, and this is really the kind of proof behind why you do PLCs, is that the amount of time for your teachers typically spend in professional development, and it could be anything. It could be a speaker, it could be a buyback day, and it's actually it's 8 hours or less. So if you're at a site that has 8 hours or less, by doing PLCs, really right now, because there's not funding for bringing in, Marzano or bringing in Kate Kinsella, things like this, PLCs is the #1 thing that you can do that's very cost effective, where teachers are going to work together, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Are they using a book? Are they using a philosophy? How do they kind of learn from one another? The 4th one is 8%. 8%. So it's A. And number 5, A, beginning teachers. So when you think about that, what do you think would be the reason that beginning teachers probably have the least amount of time working with colleagues? Yeah, they're overwhelmed. They're probably prepping in their classroom. They may not have created the kind of connections with teachers. Yeah, networking, things like that. So that's something to think about, the benefits. If you're at a school site with a lot of new teachers or even new to the school site, that's another benefit for doing PLCs. Number 6 would be C. There's little or no correlation between the experience of teaching quality after the first year of teaching, which I thought was very interesting when Anne was going through the research with us. So I thought that was, I know some of these guys, but
it's not always quality, but I think there's a confidence built in experience that comes through.
And I think it comes out of, if they're working in a team together, it doesn't matter what level they're at. So if you're working as a team, then they're continuing to grow as a team too. And then the last one is C, both of these. So collaboration to improve instruction and also supportive school conditions and culture. So what I want to look at before we go into the article, just for the back, kind of the background of PLCs. On page 2, I think most of you have seen something like this before. So on page 2, it talks about when you have a training for teachers, what is the likelihood that it's going to go to application? So if you look at the first column, it talks about the different types of trainings. We've all probably gone to these different types of trainings. The first one is kind of a presentation of the theory. So we've all kind of gone to that before, and it could be a lecturer or a researcher presenting what they've learned within their research. Usually only about 5 to 10% of that is going to go into application. So a lot of it is just kind of knowledge based, and teachers may not know how to put it into place, where they hear something like we need to differentiate or we need to do data teams, but they're not sure of what that actually looks like. The next one is modeling, where it's only going in once or twice for modeling without coaching. So you have someone where it could be you go and watch a teacher teach for an hour, but there's no debrief before or after. The likelihood of that going into practice is going to be about the same, 5 to 10%. Practice and low risk feedback, so it could be similar to kind of BITSA, where you have a coach go in, they're practicing something, and it's low feedback in the sense of that they're not evaluated, but they feel like they can practice that. It gets a little bit higher, but what they found was if you want to make the most kind of change and also the application of practices, is that doing something where it's a team. So you have either a team that they're working together, it's a coach on an ongoing basis, and if you don't have the funds for a coach, it could be a grade level chair or some type of leader within the grade level or in the department that's going to be the coach for everybody else. And then also it has to be kind of peer input. So either watching a video where you're videoing a lesson, going in and seeing some type of instruction, so it's an ongoing basis, and they're using this based upon either some type of curriculum. It also can be on research. So if you're looking at academic vocabulary and you're basing it on Kate Kinsella, that might be something that you do. Or if you're looking at writing instruction, and a lot of schools are using Lucy Calkins writing, they're going to be going back to the foundations of whatever you're working on. Or if you're doing something arts related, you might be going back to whatever principles you're using for your arts instruction. So you always have to go back to whatever is guiding you. So it's not, you know, it's based on the research of something guiding you. What we're going to do next is an activity called Glean the Golden Lines. And the following article, I think most of you probably have seen this before or are familiar with DeFore. So page 3 is just really the background information about what is a professional learning community. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to number you guys off so you don't have to read the whole thing. So the 3 of you are going to be number 1, so it's big idea number 1. You're going to read that and then just kind of pull out one important line that you think is most important. You guys are big idea number 2. And then we'll have this front section be big idea number 3. And then how about the back section, you also can be big idea number 3. Okay? So go ahead and read your section, and then just pull out one important line that you think is most important from your section. So pick one sentence from your section that you think really speaks to you. And you might have 2 or 3, but just pick one for the sake of this. Once you pick your sentence, just kind of highlight it or put a star next to it. You can write a phrase from that sentence that you think encompasses what that sentence means, and then if there's one word that is the biggest kind of impact of what that sentence and phrase is talking about. Does that make sense? So it's going to be at sentence level, then take it to a phrase if you can, and then individual word. So, and most of you will probably get to the sentence and the phrase, and I'm hoping most of you can get to that word. So let's just take 1 or 2 minutes. I'll see how much time you guys need for this, and then we're going to share out just your sentences, phrase, and your word for your one section. I have a table 10 coming around. This is yours if you'd like to take one. We put these out when we do our data teams training, when we do PLC training, but this is what we saw one site when we went on a distinguished school visit. Okay, so what we use are, we actually took the DeFore questions that are around student learning, and we wanted them, the teachers, to think about their own learning as teachers. So we have 2 visuals on your little table tent that you'll get. The first one is that it's a lighthouse, because when we look at data or when you have teachers work together as a team, you're always going to look at the big picture. So we have the lighthouse that has the big picture of the data of the school site, and then within their PLC teams, they will always kind of, it's going to be a microscope. So they're going to look at their own practice, they'll look at their individual students, they look at their individual grade level, maybe an individual question or concept they want students to learn. So these questions kind of guide how teachers are learning themselves, and then if you want to take it to the student level, you just kind of take out the word teacher and it becomes the student, which is the 4 original questions. So what do we want teachers to learn if you're doing professional development with them? How do we know if teachers are continually learning within their data team or in their PLCs? What do we do if teachers are not learning at our school site? So what does the leader do there, or what does the team do if they see a teacher's not kind of at that level where they're learning? And how do you motivate them or engage them? And then what do we do if teachers are learning? So how do you have teachers express what they're learning and then share their successes as a school site? So these types of questions are what we work with staffs when we're doing it. And then if you're doing the same thing at just an individual student level, that's what teachers will reflect on. So how do we know students are learning? What does it look like? What do we do if students are learning? What do we do if students aren't learning? And then how do we continue to create an environment where they're constantly learning? So if you'd like to take this, you're more than happy to. And then we're going to hear from the different sections of the article. And when you're saying your section of the article, just tell us the page and the paragraph that it's on. And we'll start with section 1. And Linnea's true.
Oh, yeah. I chose the last sentence in the first paragraph, which talks about the shift from a focus on teaching to a focus on learning and how it has profound implications for schools.
Breaking her
And then the
rules.
phrase was, I think, deep team learning,
Uh-huh.
and then achievement would be the word.
Okay.
Great.
We're on page 8. It's the first paragraph. The last sentence in the first paragraph. And you can kind of do ... The crucial first step in transformation came when the staff began to honestly confront data on student achievement and work together to improve results rather than make excuses for them. And to paraphrase that, it would be just that the aha comes in a team when they no longer worry about what their own data is saying, but they're looking at how can I improve what I'm doing because your kids did so well on question 5. What did you do worse?
So we're going to get a chance to look at this a little bit further. The one thing I want to share is we're going to move into an activity where you're going to read a scenario on a school site. And on page 9, it talks about the cultural shift from a PLC, from a traditional model to an actual PLC. So a traditional school, the focus is on learning, where you're in a shift to a PLC is that you're really looking at the learning of the students and thinking about how are you going to improve that. The other thing is that from a traditional school, there is kind of infrequent assessments given, where on a PLC there's going to be kind of frequently assessments will be given, or you might have student input or some type of interaction with parents, so you're keeping that on an ongoing basis. Also, what you'll notice is that there is a shift from where you're looking at the learning to for learning. So how are you getting students to learn on an ongoing basis and having them look at that? The other thing is that when you look at the assessments that are in place for students, rather than you give the assessment, you have a grade. In a PLC, you give the assessment and then you provide an ongoing intervention for students that need it. So it's not, we give the test, you scored this grade, that's all you have. In a true PLC, the students will constantly have opportunities to improve. So it's a different cultural shift when you look at that, and it's not that we gave the test and that's it and we move on completely. It's going to be that there's going to be opportunities, and that's a hard thing to figure out how you fit that time in. So how do you fit in the time to reteach a concept, or to switch up the kids for RTI for one, block of time during the day for 20 minutes so that they can get, structure at their individual level. So we're going to look right now at just some practices that are in place. In a traditional school, the focus is on learning. What do we want, or on teaching, where what are we going to teach? How am I going to teach it? What does it look like? How have I always taught it? Where in a divorce school or a PLC school, you're thinking about how the students learned it. So I haven't taught it until they've learned it. Traditional school, teaching is done in isolation. Usually the classroom door is shut. They probably wouldn't do a lot of planning together. We're in a PLC, the doors are open. They could be collaborating, team teaching together, planning lessons together. The teachers typically in a traditional school will think about themselves independently and think about only their student data or only their students. Or in a PLC, it turns into the whole school site or the whole grade level or the whole department. Most teachers have little impact on the vision or the mission or the goals of the school, where in a PLC it turns into a total school kind of shared leadership. And then the last one is the mission statement is pretty generic, where in a PLC it's kind of targeted based on the needs of the school. You can see that the norms are, the assessments are norm-based. It's usually driven by a curriculum, which is a test book. And then state results are used for grading purposes only, where in a PLC, it's a collaborative venture. You have a lot of focused support on student learning. You have leadership responsibilities amongst different teachers, and then also in a shared way where it's also reflective and responsible for teachers, and it also values them and their time. You have PLCs where you're sharing best practices and you're improving instruction. The assessment is for learning. It's not that we gave the assessment, these are the students that are not at proficiency and now we move on. It's like you look at the data and you think these students didn't get it, so how are we going to reteach it again to them as quickly as possible, or what did somebody else use that I can use in my instruction to help those learners. So here's what we're going to do. So you have a traditional school and you have a PLC school, kind of the two different philosophies in mind. We're going to divvy out these different school sites, and it has their philosophy around it. And I'll start with the Charles Darwin together, and then we'll have individual ones for each group. So the first one is, Lene, you want to read us the motto?
We believe that all kids can learn based upon their ability.
And then student aptitude is fixed and it's not subject to influence by teachers. As a result, we create multiple programs that tracks to address differing ability levels. And tracking gives students the best chance for mastering the content that is appropriate to their abilities. So would this be a traditional school or would it be a PLC school when looking at it? Traditional. And what are some things that come in mind that would tell you that it's traditional rather than PLC? Tracking is one, so they have their own ability and it has nothing to do with what instruction is taking place. Create multiple programs. There's multiple programs, right, that are just for their ability groups, but then also when looking at it, it's not going to be moving everybody into one type of track. They're in that track and they might stay in that track. So some of you, when you hear that, you might think about a site that you work at, or it might remind you of a site you previously worked at, and this is kind of a traditional model. What you're going to do is I'm going to do the same groups again. So if you were number one, you're going to do the Pontius Pilate School. You're going to kind of read through it and then tell us later, is it traditional or is it PLC? Number two, you guys are the Chicago Cub Band School. It's page 14. And then our number three group is the Henry Higgins School, is page 15. So you're just going to kind of read through it as a group, decide is it traditional or is it a PLC school, and then are there any attributes of this that remind you of your own school? So let's start with the first one, group one, the Pontius Pilate School. We believe that all kids can learn if they take advantage of the opportunity we give them to learn, so the students have to take that initiative. And it's the teacher's job to provide all students with an opportunity to learn by presenting lessons that are clear and engaging. It is the student's job to learn, and if they elect to not do so, we must hold them accountable for their decisions. So what do you guys squad? That's the way it should be. So PLC or non-PLC?
We thought this was a non-PLC.
Non-PLC.
Because a PLC school would take into account what if they don't learn.
Yes. And this is usually like a first step for PLCs. They'll say, okay, you know, we think that we're going to do engaging lessons and we're going to be clear and we're going to do best practices, but there's always going to be kids that won't learn, and the ones that don't learn are going to continue to fail. So that's usually what we've noticed is the first step of somebody that wants to transition to PLC. Everybody might kind of jump on the train that they want to look at best instruction and they have good intentions, but they always think that there's going to be some students that will fail. So PLC is that it's really a huge shift that failure is an option. It's looking at the kids that are struggling, what are you going to do to support them? There's something that they need, or there's something within their home environment that they need ongoing support with for behavior or for academics. So it's really a tough culture to shift, because when you think about, especially in high schools, it's a hard shift to make, that there are some students that will fail, and it's shifting from the student responsibility to the school responsibility. Let's go to the next one, the Chicago Cub Fan School. So we believe that all kids can learn something, and we will help all students experience academic growth in a warm and nurturing environment. So it sounds nice. The student's growth is determined by a combination of his or her innate ability and their effort that they put in. Since we have little impact on either, we will create an environment that fosters their sense of well-being and their self-esteem. So what do you guys think? PLC? Traditional. So sometimes you think about before starting PLCs, you see a lot of this in elementary. So they have their own kind of ability, and the teachers look at their ability, and then you're trying to think about how do we build up their self-esteem, how do we make the students feel good so it's a nice environment to be in, but still the kids are pretty much tracked based on their ability rather than thinking about how do we provide support for all students.
And that's why some of us still have our 26-year-olds living at home.
Because they went to school so much self-esteem, and you can do anything you want, you know? In the Henry Higgins School, we believe all students can and must learn at relatively high levels of achievement, and it is our responsibility to work with each student until our high standards have been achieved. PLC. And then what is it that makes this a PLC in comparison to the other ones? What are they focused on?
All students, our responsibility, high standards.
And it's
until
really,
they learn, until they get it.
yeah, and it's really ongoing. You know, it's till the last day of school. And for a lot of PLCs, it's even after they graduate. It's even after they move on to the next grade level. They're still following the students. There's a vested interest in the students, and how are we going to continually support them either to a new school or to the new venture within life. So it's a place where they can continually grow, and then also think about having really high standards for all learners. So it's a very hard place to get to, but it's something that you have to be grounded in first when you start PLCs, is that you all have the same vision. So if it's a vision that certain students are going to fail, and that's just like the natural bell curve, that some kids aren't going to get it, that kind of vision needs to shift within the culture. Otherwise, you will continue to get the same kind of growth and the same kind of mentality.
But I think when you get to this level, you have also you also have the inherent quality of giving the students a connection, a fostering, nurturing environment, because you're looking at them on an individual basis and paying attention. Yeah, exactly. You're paying attention to what's happening. So inherently, you're getting that with this one.
Right.
So.
Well, the thing that comes up for me about all of these is something Jennifer said earlier, which is, a lot of times teachers are, a school will say, okay, we're having a PLC initiative, we're having PLCs or grade level PLCs, and the teachers come at it really with a lot of kind of inquiry and open mind and focused on student learning, and then they see things, they see holes, they see gaps, the data reveals something, and then they bring it up, but they're not allowed to really make the changes because they still have to follow the prescribed curriculum, or they still have to be on the same page at the same time, whoever,
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to shift just for the sake of time, and I talked about our kind of focus questions earlier. So it's always around learning. So how do we know if students are learning? How do we know if they are not learning? What does that look like? And then more importantly, once you get all students to learning, what do we do if everyone is learning? So there are some sites that we work with where students are all doing well. How do you continue to keep doing well and continue to grow with them? So these are the 4 questions when looking at PLCs, what you will focus on. And really I like this visual when you think about PLCs. So in a traditional classroom, if you think about these mice are trying to figure out the maze of, keep everybody engaged and get everybody on track, and also have everybody highly academic in the sense of their skills and also what they're achieving. It's this huge maze of trying to figure out everything you need to do, where a PLC is having them look together, talk about it together, do a game plan, and then figure out kind of the best way that you can go through it. So it is kind of relying on each other and thinking about with each other, how do you create that game plan? So this visual I like, it's just a nice visual for them to see of how it works, students. So what we're going to do right now is, rather than do the block party, if you could turn to just 16, this is, rather than having you kind of jigsaw this article up for the sake of time, I just want to go through kind of a thumbs up, a thumbs down approach to appropriate use of learning teams. And as I'm going through, you can just kind of check it off and put a star next to the ones that maybe you've differed with at your school site or something that's new for you. So thumbs up for number 3, coordinate and improve classroom teaching strategies. That's what the PLC should be based on. It's also thumbs up for number 4. You keep the same focus the entire school year. So the focus doesn't change. It's not, this month we're going to look at student engagement, and next month we're going to do book clubs. So you just stick with the same kind of goal the whole year. And it could be 2 or 3 goals that you're looking at for student learning, but you just stick with it the whole year so you can continue to think about how do you adjust it, because it's going to take time to perfect it. Number 5 is an either or. So you work on curriculum alignment and mapping. Sometimes you do. Sometimes in a PLC, you're not using a curriculum. You might be pulling in other resources, and that's why it is important for the principal and the curriculum director of the district or the site to be open to that, because sometimes the Houghton Mifflin or Open Chord or whatever you're using doesn't meet the needs of all the students. And there might be other, resources that you can use that are arts integrated, things like that. 6 is a thumbs up. You examine student work on an ongoing basis, and it should be something that everybody can see everyone's student work and also have a chance to talk about it. 7, thumbs up. You look and apply research-based information and teaching. So it always has to be centered around some type of research. So whatever you decide as a leadership team, you're going to work on some type of kind of guru that you might be using for your instruction. It's not based on, I used this with my best friend at my previous school and it worked really well. It has to be something where it's been proven to work at other school sites. You might have a model school that you will always go and use for your research. That would work, but it just can't be, I like this curriculum, we used it 5 years ago and I felt good when we used it. It always has to be around data. So the next one, look and apply, we talked about that. So number 8 would be a thumbs down, focus on classroom management and discipline. So the PLC is not really a time to thinking about, what your behavior plan is going to be or what do you do for discipline issues. That should be a separate meeting all of itself. So during PLC, it should be always focused on instruction and strategies and what you're going to do. The next one, number 9, is thumbs up. Meet at the school during the school day. They found that if you meet at the school site rather than out of the school site, sometimes the conversation will go somewhere else, and then also not everybody is maybe involved in it, although it is fun to meet at different places sometimes too. So, the next one, 10, examine the impact of new teaching strategies on students. So it has to be a risk environment where teachers can try something new, and if they try it and it doesn't work, that's fine. You just learn from that. So it has to be an environment. And in the back of the packet, I'll pull this out. It's this little ticket. So on page 39, I like this little okay ticket. It says, it's okay. I used a new teaching strategy and it did not work as well as I hoped. This ticket entitles me to continue to learn new ideas, to help my students be more successful and have a support from my colleagues while I do so. So there's going to be times that you try something and it just didn't work. Maybe you have to tweak it, or maybe that's not the one that you want to use. So it has to be a risk environment where sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. Also, I'm on the next one, 11, thanks. Principal is a member of the team, and that's actually a thumb down. Principal can be involved in it, but they found that when principals aren't in the meeting themselves always, it actually works better. Principals have to have the protocol. Principals will be involved in the minutes, so if you have a log or a minutes, they'll always be involved in that. But they found that more successful teams take more risk when the principal is not there. So they're always going to be involved in what's happening, but they won't be always sitting at the table. So that's kind of, for some people, that was a new kind of venture. You rotate the responsibilities of the team members. That's a thumbs up. So you don't always have the same person facilitating. It should be that anybody in the group can do the protocol or talk about what went best within their instruction. The focus is on teacher professional development. That's a thumbs up. So it's always thinking about how do we get teachers to improve for student learning. 14, thumbs down, discuss department and grade level issues. So it could be, class sizes, it could be supplies we need to order, it could be books that we turn into the library, things like that. So that's a different, completely another time. It might be something that you could do over the email or a phone call or something. 15, thumbs up, observe colleagues using different strategies. That would be a PLC. Attend learning team meetings. That's another PLC where team might go and watch another team how they have a meeting and see how they focus. So that would be a good strategy. Also document all activities. So in the back of this packet, it has all these different logs that you can use that are very simple to use. It doesn't have to be time consuming. It's just, this is our plan, here's what's going to be the next step, and here are the people responsible. 18, thumbs down, work on procedures for improving standardized test scores. So that could be like test taking strategies, or that would be not what you do during PLCs. It's always what instruction will you work on. You can use, question stems at a different time or test taking strategies, but that's not during PLC time. Discuss administrative and front burner issues that would not be on the PLC agenda, so that would be at a different kind of FAC meeting or something like that. Yes. Share team logs. So teams should share the team logs with one another. So it should be that when you email them out, everybody has access to every grade level's team. So if they are trying a new strategy, 2nd grade can learn from 4th grade, or 5th grade can learn from 1st grade, and thinking about how they're all trying different strategies and continue to grow. You keep the team size small. That's a critical one. That's a thumbs up. So it should be 3 to 5 people ideally, and if you have more, then maybe you have different groups within that grade level or different focuses that they're looking at. We're down to the last few. So 22 is either or. So it could be a book study or it cannot be a book study, and it all has to think about what book you would use if you're going to use book study or research. So it could be an either or. And you meet on an as-needed basis. That would be a thumbs down. So you always meet regularly. So if it's the first Tuesday of every month, it's always the first Tuesday for that same amount of time the whole year. You keep a focus on classroom instruction, thumbs up, and periodically evaluate how the team is functioning. And that's what the resources in the back of the packet are all about. So the next article just talks about all of these thumbs up, thumbs down. It tells you the research behind it, why you would do that, why you wouldn't. The rest of this, I've organized it kind of by either instructional leader, I've also done it by department chair, I've done it by team member, and there are all these different strategies in here for PLCs. The next ones, starting on page 29, it goes through logistics. So when they've looked at sites across the nation that use PLCs, and sometimes they call it PLTs for teams, what are the logistics? This is what the principal or the instructional leader needs to know is, when do they meet? How do they meet? How often do they meet? What process do they use when they meet? So all the resources that you would need for that, and it has like a checklist in there. There on 31 is a meeting activity sampler. So it has what you would do during initial meetings, kind of the ideas, what you do during continued meetings, and then kind of as your reflective meetings, what do you do too? So it has activities in here for different meetings. The number one thing they found that when starting a PLC is that you always have to have norms, and some teachers think it's silly, but if you have norms where the team has created the norms, they live by the norms, they're kind of revisited every time you have the meeting, it keeps it so the teachers don't have to spend too much time within it, and it also values their time. So you're not going to spend 3 hours in your PLC when it could be a 45-minute meeting if you're just sticking to the norms. So that's one thing that I put in here, norms. they found was critical, and then also the second critical thing was the mission of the school site. So you all have to be in agreement of what the mission of the school site is and what you're focusing on. The rest is basically reflections for data. So we have protocols in here that you can use. If you've had a PLC or been involved in a PLC, you've probably used a protocol before. So these are just different questions you can use for reflection when looking at student work. There's also like a team goal setting sheet, similar to data teams, how you can set a goal as a team. And then actually the ones that I found that were the most different in comparison to DeFore's were later on, starting in page kind of 43, it's all about team building. So at the beginning of the year, you would have a team building kind of activity where they find out the qualities of one another. So on 43, it has like something about the teacher talent in the group. So who's an expert in technology? Who's an expert within visual arts? Who knows how to, it has like different things that you can have students or teachers kind of check off what their skills are so they can share it with one another. And then the rest go through, and they found that the most effective PLCs do an ongoing reflection on their work as a PLC. So on an ongoing basis, maybe once every 3 or 4 months, they stop, they do an individual reflection on how is the team working, how is the leader of the group, are we all on track, are we sticking to this? Just like in your classroom instruction, you'd have your students reflect on their learning and their behavior. Same thing kind of with teachers where it's not more behavior, it's, you know, am I taking a risk? Am I collaborating? Am I sharing? How is our team working together? Are we all, you know, being held accountable? And it's something to look at because some teams you work with, there's going to be a little bit of a shift, and some it's going to be a long shift where it might take years for the whole team to completely shift to the new philosophy. So they found by having assessments within self-assessment, you can have more critical conversations about that. And realize that it's a process. You can't just be in a PLC 1 year and have dynamic changes, and then also where everybody's sharing and, you know, you have the best practices. It has to be an ongoing basis where you're constantly complementing one another. You know, you're sharing the successes, where it might be a little success, but you're sharing what the student did based on the lesson that you learned from a colleague. So something that you can take away from this is hopefully some resources that you can use. So I felt the most important thing in here, rather than having you just get some ideas from me within research, I thought that hopefully there's 1 or 2 resources that you can walk away with and use at your school site, or take back and share with your educational leader within your district or your site. Hopefully today you either had a chance to get to know PLCs or had a chance to reflect on the best practices. I put in a few articles. You have the DeFore article, you also have the Ann Jolly article in there for PLCs. And then these are other either resources you can use. You might already have some of these where it's just either books that you can use for professional learning teams. And the most important thing is when you're doing this is that all members of the school site should be involved in some type of PLC, even nurses and, you know, when looking at librarians, principals, they all should be involved in some type of professional learning team. That is what I have for today. I like to end with the John Wooden's quote. So when he became a teacher, he took the responsibility very seriously. He believed then, and he did at that point too, that I was paid to teach, and that meant that it was my responsibility to help every one of my students learn. I believe it's impossible to claim that you have taught when there are students that have not learned. And that's really the focus of PLCs. So we haven't taught until everybody has learned to that kind of highest level. So, and then I'm not going to collect this, but this might be something to reflect on, and especially within arts. So think about how you can include arts integration in your PLC, where maybe it's going to be the focus of it, or it might be the focus of your school site when looking at how do we improve our practice so that all students have access to the content. So that's what I have for today. I have my my email address on here if you need to contact me. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint, just email me and I'll send it to you. There's extra handouts outside, and I know I went really quickly, but thank you for your participation. And
Thank you.